When this dog approaches some food, another dog's playful snarls are played back. The dog seems curious, but the sound doesn't stop it from taking the bone. Here, a dog hears the growls of a dog being approached by a stranger. But these don't deter it from grabbing the bone either. In another scenario, the sound of a dog protecting its food is played back. This time, the dog backs off. These experiments suggest that dogs can distinguish between different types of growls.
And so this is one picture that probably you all know what it is when you see it. It's a familiar looking image. It's something that probably we all have some personal experience with, right? This is a chest X-ray that would be taken in your doctor's office, for example, or a radiologist's office. And it is a good example of biomedical engineering in that it takes a physical principle, that is, how do X-rays interact with the tissues of your body, and it uses that physics, that physical principle, to develop a picture of what's inside your body. So to look inside and see things that you couldn't see without this device. And you'll recognize some of the parts of the image. You can see the rib cage here, the bones. You can see the heart is this large, bright object down here. If you're have good eyesight from the distance that you're at, you can see the vessels leading out of the heart and into the lungs. And the lungs are these darker spaces within the rib cage.
Wilson came then from a different world, and he became the focal point of a broad mainstream American culture that thought that modern literature and wanted modern literature to be able to be read and appreciated by ordinary people. They were not modernists in an abstract sense, and certainly some of them, like T.S. Eliot and Faulkner, were too difficult for some of their writings to be read by ordinary people. But this was a world before the division between the brows or between elite or whatever had established itself as part of our consciousness. Wilson was a major player in the successful effort of his generation to establish at the heart of American life an innovative literature that would equal the great cultures of Europe. And he knew that the great cultures of Europe were there. He was not a product of a narrow American studies kind of training at all. He joined a high artistic standard with an openness to all experience and a belief that literature was as much a part of life for everyone as conversation. He thought that Proust and Joyce and Yeats and Eliot could and should be read by ordinary Americans and helped that to happen. Wilson was a very various man. Over a period of almost 50 years, he was a literary journalist, an investigative reporter, a brilliant memoirist, and dedicated journal keeper. His biographical histories To the Finland Station and Patriotic Gore are profoundly influential with Americans today.
For better or worse, we live in a world profoundly affected by Sigmund Freud. If I had to ask you, name a famous psychologist, the answer, most of you, would be Freud. He's the most famous psychologist ever, and he's had a profound influence on the 20th and 21st century. Some biographical information: he was born in the 1850s. He spent most of his life in Vienna, Austria, but he died in London, and he escaped to London soon after retreating there at the beginning of World War II, as the Nazis began to occupy where he lived. He's one of the most famous scholars ever, but he's not known for any single discovery. Instead, he's known for the development of an encompassing theory of mind, one that he developed over the span of many decades.
Computer scientist Shwetak Patel and his team are developing new sensing systems.
The initial focus was really around energy and water monitoring.
They built a new generation of smart sensors that monitor electronic interference on a home's power line or water pressure changes in the plumbing. Most of this technology has already found industrial applications, and Patel and his team turned their attention to adapting the technology for personal health monitoring.
So how do we take this noise and make it into a signal of interest was kind of the core of what we did for many years, and we're taking that work and applying it to other domains.
They're looking to take advantage of all the functionality built into our smartphones. With the user's permission, this app can use the microphone built into most smartphones to listen to background noises, such as coughing, searching for patterns that suggest a trip to the doctor might be in order.
We construct these models that try and understand how sound works, what its patterns are, and we give it a whole bunch of examples of different kinds of audio, things like people talking, things like people laughing, sneezing, and of course coughing.
This app uses a phone's camera to check hemoglobin levels in blood by analyzing the color of capillary fluids through the skin.
Generally, what happens is if you're anemic, your blood's going to be a little less red. And we take advantage of that by putting your finger over a camera of a phone. The camera of the phone can actually see the coloration of the blood.
And this test uses the camera to help parents worried about jaundice in newborn infants.
Now, jaundice is something that doctors who have seen tons of babies can just kind of figure out on a very basic level of, is this baby, do they need to get treatment, or are they in a good condition? Whereas a first-time parent has no idea necessarily what jaundice might look like.
The researchers say the built-in sensors found in smartphones are already commonplace, but their applications and their implications for our health and well-being may be more far-reaching than we ever imagined.
The Earth's temperature is rising, and as it does, springtime phenomena, like the first bloom of flowers, are getting earlier and earlier. But rising temperatures aren't the only factor. Urban light pollution is also quickening the coming of spring.
So temperature and light are really contributing to a double whammy of making everything earlier.
Richard French-Constant, an entomologist at the University of Exeter. He and his colleagues compiled 13 years of data from citizen scientists in the UK who tracked the first bud burst of 4 common trees. And it turns out light pollution from streetlights in cities and along roads pushed bud burst a full week earlier, way beyond what rising temperatures could achieve. This disruptive timing can ripple through the ecosystem.
The caterpillars that feed on trees are trying to match the hatching of their eggs to the timing of bud bursts, because the caterpillars want to feed on the juiciest and least chemically protected leaves. And it's not just the caterpillars, of course, that are important, but the knock-on effect is on nesting birds, which are also trying to hatch their chicks at the same time that there's the maximum number of caterpillars.
So earlier buds could ultimately affect the survival of birds and beyond. The findings are in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B. The world's becoming increasingly urbanized, and light pollution is growing, which French-Constant says could trick trees into budding earlier and earlier. But smarter lighting, like LEDs that dial down certain wavelengths, could help.
Perhaps the exciting thing is that if we understand more about how light affects this bud burst, that we might be able to devise smarter sort of street lighting that has less red components and therefore less early bud burst.
Thus keeping springtime an actual springtime phenomenon.
We can ask 2 fundamental questions about animal behaviour. They're referred to as proximate and ultimate. Proximate questions are those concerned with the mechanisms that bring about behaviour. Ultimate questions are those concerned with the evolution of behaviour. We can divide the proximate and ultimate questions into two sub-questions. For proximate, how does the behaviour develop? And secondly, what causes the behaviour? For ultimate, we can ask, how did the behaviour evolve? And secondly, what is the adaptive significance of the behaviour? What's its purpose?
Together, these comprise what are called Tinbergen's 4 questions about animal behaviour. Nico Tinbergen was one of the founding fathers of the study of animal behaviour. These questions represent the different ways of studying animal behaviour, and understanding the difference between those 4 questions are fundamental to understanding behaviour and indeed the whole of biology. How do we study animal behaviour? Well, that depends on the type of question we're hoping to answer.
When you think of a leader, you may think of an individual who is, above all, bold. But a new study of fish called sticklebacks shows that shy individuals actually prefer to follow fish that are similarly timid. Researchers had trios of sticklebacks with known personalities play follow the leader. The fish were placed in a tank that had some plastic plants at one end and some food hidden at the other. In some of the groups, a bold fish and a shy fish acted as leaders, while another shy fish followed. And in other groups, it was a bold fish that did the following. The researchers recorded whether the follower sallied forth more frequently with the fish that was behaviorally similar or the one that was different. What they found is that shy fish were more likely to emerge from under cover when an equally wary fellow was already out there. Bold follower fish did not seem to care as much which leader they followed. Of course, no matter which fish a stickleback chose to stick with, the bold fish did lead more joint expeditions over the course of the experiment than their more retiring friends. That's because the bold fish initiated more trips, regardless of who might be tailing them. The findings are in the journal Biology Letters. The researchers write that when offered a choice of leaders, sticklebacks prefer to follow individuals whose personality matches their own. But bolder individuals may, nevertheless, be able to impose their leadership, even among shy followers, simply through greater effort. We may soon see if such tendencies also hold true in humans when Americans decide who they'll follow in November, unless, of course, something fishy happens.
Here are 3 important factors in creativity: people, process, and product. The most important ones is the process. First, you have to create the right person through education with a creative mind. Second, you have to create the right process to have people engaged in the innovation process. Third, you need to find the right problem to work on. Human beings can survive and prosper largely depending on the creativity they have. If you identify and assess the creativity of a finished product, it is taken as a proxy for the creativity of the person who produced such a product. Therefore, a creative product should be surprising, original, beautiful, and useful. People should have factors necessary for genius, ability, and the right mindset. You should improve to imitate and change insight, look from new perspectives. Innovately create something with imagination to expand the conceptual spaces.
There's sugar in a lot of foods where you don't expect it. And of course, there's lots of sugar in donuts or ice cream or pastries or other things that are sweet, candy of course. But there are other places where you see it and you don't necessarily expect it. So as an example, peanut butter. Here's a list of ingredients from Skippy peanut butter, and you see that sugar is the second most common ingredient. Excuse me, you may know from reading food labels that these ingredients in any food label are listed in order of how much there is in the food itself. So sugar comes right after peanuts. Here's another example, beef stew. You wouldn't necessarily expect to find sugar in beef stew, but it's there. Now it's down the list of ingredients. It's actually toward the end. But if you look at the marketing of this and look at the can, it says there's fresh potatoes and carrots, but actually there's more sugar in this than there is carrots. And so you wouldn't eat something like beef stew and expect to find this to be the case.